Thank you so much, both of you, for coming to Oxford and joining us on this special event. And I guess you've got a presentation prepared we are very looking forward to hearing, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Chen-Kai. It's been 19 months since we last spoke to human beings together. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see people's reactions. Actually, I might not be thinking that later on, but anyway. Nothing is off limits tonight. After we've spoken, ask any question you like, and we will answer as honestly and as openly as we can. I'm going to start by casting my mind back to sitting at the back of a room where a very elderly Holocaust survivor was speaking to a school, a girls' school, a girls' Jewish school, a talk that had enormous significance for those girls. And at the end of a very emotional talk, she asked for questions. And the first question from a clearly distressed teenage girl was, "What can we do?" And the survivor said, "Talk to people who are different. Reach out to people who are different to you, who have a different nationality, culture, heritage. Get to know them. Make friends with them. Understand their lives. That is how we make things better." And the year before, when I was giving my standard talk about my SS grandfather in a synagogue of all places, a lady came up to me at the end and said, "I want us to speak together." And that was Noemi, showing imagination, courage, and determination. And that's what we've been doing ever since. I'll hand over to Noemi.
Hi, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here and to speak to you all. I think I can say for Derek and myself, we love students for obvious reasons. You're here to learn, you want to engage, you want to grow, and Derek and I would so like to be part of that, to be part of your journey here today. So a huge thank you, Shanghai, and to your colleagues for coming to hear us today. As you've heard briefly, Derek and I met a few years ago. And in a way, I'm asking you to do what Derek and I did in a small part. We met each other and continue to meet each other across our imaginary bridge. And how did I see Derek when I first met him or went to meet him? And how did Derek see me? Did I see him as the Nazi? He's clearly not. You will hear it was his grandfather. Intellectually, I knew that. Intellectually, I understood that. Equally, did Derek come and say hello to the Jew, the Orthodox Jewess? Equally, he knew my name is Noemi, and we're here to share the message that we so believe in. More of that later. How do you today view us now? And maybe how do you view us after the talk? Might be change, might not be. And as Shanghai said, why is the Holocaust still relevant today? Something that happened so long ago, something that obviously might not be to do with you if you're not of the Jewish faith or have a similar background to Derek. Times change, we know that. We live in an amazing modern time. But I believe humanity and human nature does not. Our feelings and our thoughts are as old as time. You just have to go back in age and in literature. I don't have to tell you learned people. You can tell me more about that, how you understand because you feel and think similarly. We are all capable of good and evil, each and every one of us. Hitler and his cronies were ordinary people. And you'll hear so from Derek too, that his grandfather was a so-called ordinary man. I believe we're all ordinary. So did Shakespeare, alas, poor Yorick. So Why is it relevant? Because hatred still exists today in the world. Hatred of Jews has grown globally in the last few years. We've had terrorism across Europe, in France, Copenhagen, terrorist attacks in Germany on synagogues. There's a rise in the Alternative für Deutschland party. They've now got 10% popularity. It's ongoing. What does it mean, anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews? Or what do I understand by that? I feel that hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Hitler and Stalin, for example, did not only target Jews. I believe it's a threat to our civilian freedom and liberty, and that took centuries to achieve. Are we willing to give that up? Anti-Semitism is a form of its hate. It comes from an emotion, but it gets dressed up into rationale, reason, and intellectual argument. And you can see how nonsensical it is, because the far right and the far left, they can't really agree. The far left believes the Jews are capitalists and will rule the world. The far right believes the exact opposite. The Jews are vermin and need to be destroyed. They're nothings. And then you have the jihadi extremism, which believe that Jews have Western values and they don't want to have don't want to take on any of the Western values. Or you can look back and see the Middle Ages, that the anti-Semites were against the religion. And in Nazi Germany, they dressed it up to be part of the moral of the land, for the good of the people, for the Aryan good, to get rid of that vermin, that evil of Jew that infested them. And of course, they did scapegoating and blaming, because when there is a problem in the world, we can either say, what do I do to make the problem better? Or use the victim card and say, they did that to me, it's all their fault, it's not my fault. Hitler in the 20s had a 2% popularity. He was a fringe politician, he was laughed at. So never dismiss fringe politicians. Here in Britain in 2018, anti-Semitism was festering and growing in the Labour Party. It was allowed, nobody said stop. MPs resigned and still there was no stop. They had to take an inquiry to prove it. It wasn't enough that people lived it and saw it. I also believe, and I think you'll join me if you're honest with yourself, that we're all inherently prejudiced. We don't like different. We're frightened of something that we don't know. I believe we're made like that. Maybe it's to protect us. So we have to be educated to understand that you don't have to hurt different, but treat different with dignity. And those that allow themselves to be educated can see how we grow from different and from the other. You yourselves will see that when you do a piece of work on your own, it's your work. But often when you join a project where many different people put their brain and capacity to it, their being their person, how big that becomes. Why do I feel so passionate about it? Well, Cheng Hai said, I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My dad was 17 in 1939, initially very excited by the outbreak of war because he heard the planes flying over. But that quickly stopped. He had to go frequently into hiding till 1941 and also went to a so-called trial labor camp where they were herded into a huge room, but the room wasn't big enough for the amount of people, so they were squashed. And there was a lot of fear, and there was noise, and the guards would just push, and men were trampled on, and beards were ripped out. That was the start. My father was born in Poland, in Upper Silesia, which is near the German border, in a small town called Zawiercie, not far from Katowice. It all exists today, which makes it sort of very real. In 1941, he was taken to his first labor camp. When we speak of labor camp, or I hear the word labor, I think labor, maybe you're different. Labor means work, and it'll be in a place where work is protected, where workers are protected, your civil rights are protected. Not so in those camps. He was in 7 different camps, which I think aren't so common. I will read them out, which you might not have heard of. So it was Grünheide, Markstadt, and then was Fünfteichen concentration camp, Großrosen, Flossenbürg concentration camp, Leonberg, and finally he was liberated by the Americans on the 30th of April 1945 near Munich at the Starnberger Lake. I want to read to you a little bit so that you hear his voice and understand better than if I were to summarize what it was like. And I will start with an excerpt where he's on a death march and what it feels like. And I'm also going to explain to you in this excerpt where this death march was. How does a person feel when he sees his companion being shot the moment he stops walking and realizes he can barely walk himself? Of course, at first he carries on. He wants to live. He reaches for his companion's hand to support himself. But he, the companion, is at the end of his strength. He pushes the hand away. He won't support the laggard. The weak one is left behind. But that one must have seen for oneself the lifeless face, the flickering eyes of a person about to confront his fate. The bullet strikes his neighbor, and soon he will also be struck. Who can say what such a person experiences whilst walking the final steps of his life? And what did I myself experience on this day? As chosen inmate, I had to carry the bread sack for the capo, and the last one in line, I had to march next to him and the SS man. The capo was the Jewish guard. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. And it was Hitler's devilish organization to do a parallel hierarchy of the Jews themselves to the Nazi regime within the camps. The SS man shot all those who stopped, and the capo had to record their concentration camp numbers. I looked into the barrel of the gun before the bullet struck the neck of the tottering person, looked at the thin stream of blood that ran slowly as life departed the body. I observed the SS man and saw how he ate with appetite his carefully prepared open sandwich whilst continuing to walk, despite his bloody deed. In the nearby fields were farmers sowing, and at one of the houses by the roadside, a woman was watering her flowers. In this moment, a bullet pierced the head of a straggler. A small stream of blood ran down the temple. And all that happened in the midst of built-up fields and lovingly tended flower gardens. And I think that's it. It happens right in front of us. I started telling you about hate, the hatred of Jews, a people that are called Jews by accident of birth, like you are who you are, because you were born into that family. You had no choice. And I've had adults and children asking me, well, what did the Jews do to deserve this or to get this form of punishment? Indeed, it's a fair question. Because surely to have such a degree of punishment, which until I myself read The Long Night, punishment is the wrong word, I could not have imagined this barbarism, bestiality, not in my wildest dreams. A child of 10 asked me that in primary school when I gave the talk. And a cabbie that I recently took in London. And he said, well, what is it with the Jews then? It must be jealousy. Well, jealousy of what? Well, they all live in nice houses and have nice cars. But before that, he said he'd been a friend of the Jews for 25 years. It's nothing bad. It's the stereotyping, and it grows. Sarah, how long have I got? I was meant to look at my watch. Derek, have you looked? Have I spoken for? 15, I've got 5 more minutes. So this happens in front of society, like 2018 with the Labour Party. It happens in front of you. So suppose I say that because I ask you, when you see things that happen, not to be bystanders. And it does take courage to speak up and speak out. I recognize that. But equally to cherish and to hold on to the democracy that we have and that we enjoy. I want to share with you another passage. Bear with me. Where my father was in a cattle truck being transported from the concentration camp of Groß-Rosen to Flottenburg. By then it was already late in the war years, February 1945, and still they didn't stop. The cattle car had no cover. It rained in, coal dust and rain. They were squashed. There was not sitting room or standing room for everybody. So half were standing, half were sitting, and they had to swap. And the sitting was in a V shape, like that, with the legs spread out so that others could sit within. There was nowhere to go to the toilet, so that happened in the carriage as well. People were very weak by then. You can imagine they'd been through 4 years by then of camps. They quickly contracted infectious disease such as dysentery, typhoid, and died on the spot. They had completed this journey on the cattle wagon and they stepped out, tired, exhausted, and barely alive, needless to say. So they're approaching the camp of Flossenburg. We marched on hard-packed snow. The peace and quiet of Sunday lay gently over the little town as we marched through. Our march became more and more arduous because we had to go up an incline. We were wretched, despairing figures as we struggled to drag ourselves along the wide covered streets. Suddenly, the loud noise of the church bells rang. Before us lay the church proclaiming Sunday. Although we retained only a pitiful glimmer of life and hope, the chimes of the bells touched something barely alive in each of us. Did this signify anything? Had the priest rung the bells on this peaceful Sunday morning to call together the good citizens of this small town to protest against the inhumanity and indignity in general, and this awful procession of corpses in particular? We really wanted to believe, to hope that the world was at least alerted from its indifference and had eyes to see this dreadful drama as it passed before them. The torture, the death of helpless people. Could they not see, hear, and feel that the face of this unfathomable mass murder, they could not and should not remain silent any longer? My dad, after the war, was liberated near Munich and studied medicine and dentistry and married my mum, who was a child survivor who at the age of 10 had a gunpoint pressed at her, close to her head, asking her repeatedly, "Are you Jewish?" I grew up in Munich not knowing anything about my past. I grew up with A Long Night on the bookshelf, and they just said, "One day you'll hear your father's story." But I grew up with a love of Munich and a love of the German people, so much so that my dad adopted his patient, which wasn't strictly kosher, as our grandmother. She was Catholic. And to this day, I love Christmas, particularly chocolate advent calendars. What I say with a love of humanity, that they managed to overcome that, is huge. I'm not advocating that survivors can do that easily, nor saying that they got through it. They lived with it for the rest of their lives. They didn't have any counseling. There was no post-traumatic stress disorder. What I'm saying is that they didn't lose their faith in people. And I think what I ask of you today is the famous saying, don't we all judge a book by its cover initially, but look deeper and work on yourselves. Over to Derek. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noemi. Oh. Shall I stand here? I'll start with the dullest picture you'll ever see, but it's also the most thought-provoking, and I'll turn it over in my head for the rest of my life. It's a single item from the company accounts. The auditor knows everything about the company. The auditor has to record expenditure and income and account for that expenditure and income. The auditor probably knows more about the company than the chief executive. This auditor is recording the year 1943. This auditor works for the SS. And this item records a rather unusual loss. A factory that closes down. The result is the loss of 8,000 workers, the loss of production. And he accounts for this closure by using a word called special action. This is a translated version of the original German, and the word that was used originally was Sonderaktion, special operation, which was a Nazi euphemism for a massacre. The 8,000 workers who were gone after the factory closed were part of between 32 and 40,000 Jews who were taken out and shot. And this auditor not only knew the number and the location, he dated it to the 3rd of November 1943, a fact that was completely unknown to the whole of the German population. And that auditor was my grandfather. I grew up in Scotland. I knew my dad was German. His sister had married a Scottish soldier, and he came to Scotland in the late 50s. Germany was a fun place. I'd never been there, but Germany came to me and to my brother. I'm at front, by the way. We had lederhosen, indestructible pants. Oh, fantastic. We'd slide around the garden, and these, not this exact pair, but they were totally indestructible. They were wonderful. We had fantastic German chocolate. Germany was a great country. I said to my dad, what was your dad? Did he fight in the war? He said, no. He fought in the First World War, and then he worked in a bank. He was a simple office manager. It was not until I reached the age of 50 that I discovered who my grandfather really was. And I have 550 photographs that came to me at the age of 50, and I began to piece together his story. He fought in the First World War. He seemed to have fought in every single battle. The Somme, Ypres, ended up being wounded at Passchendaele. Here he is in 1921 with his intended bride. In ordinary circumstances, in other circumstances, he might have lived a blameless life. He raised his first 2 children in Hameln and then in Dortmund. He was a keen photographer. You see the beauty in this photograph at Christmas. There's a kind of ethereal quality to it. And when the army came to the city, like any excited citizen at a special event, he was there taking photographs. And then something happened, and I don't know what it was. But he started taking photographs of a stormtrooper parade here. Dortmund, a communist city. Hitler only got 20% of the vote. But my grandfather in 1930, for whatever reason, had signed up for the Nazi Party. He didn't just sign up. His evening entertainment was as a party official He would knock on people's doors and ask them for their political views. By now, Hitler is in power. If they don't accord with those of Adolf Hitler, then my grandfather is supposed to report them to the Gestapo. My dad's born by the time this photograph's taken. He's in the pram in the middle. And by now, my grandfather is in some difficulty. He's lost his job. He has a wife and 3 children to support. He says to his landlord, I can't pay the rent. A friend of my grandfather says, I know somebody who went to the same school as you in Hameln, and I think he could get you a job. That somebody was Heinrich Himmler's deputy in the SS. And so my grandfather went to Bavaria to be inducted into the SS, a process of indoctrination that he went to in his mid-30s, late 30s. He wasn't some young man who didn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He took this photograph of some of his comrades. His comrades included at least 10 men who went on to become concentration camp commandants. He was mixing with some pretty grubby people. And he took this photograph, the most historically important photograph I have. He's standing in a guard tower at the exact location of today's visitor centre at Dachau concentration camp. We're witnessing the arrival of an important person. A man in the little cluster in the middle on the left is giving the Hitler salute. My grandfather, maybe slightly shaky with excitement, takes this photograph. Maybe it was illicit. At that time, he's working as an auditor for the SS. At that time. We move forward now to 1938, and the family have been relocated to Berlin. My grandfather now, he has the special uniform. He has a chauffeur who turns up at the house and drives him to work every day. And here are his children in a beautiful, beautiful suburb of Berlin, especially built for them. Built for the SS on the orders of Himmler. And here we have a New Year's Eve party, a great celebration. The lady at the front is wearing a tiara with 1939 on her head. This is 7 weeks after Kristallnacht, when the Jewish synagogues were burned, when people were beaten and sent to concentration camps. But my family are having a good time. And in all these family photographs, there is a dissonance. There is a dissonance between what is happening in this ordinary, loving family. There are hundreds of pictures of people showing great affection to each other. And yet, at the exact time that this photograph was taken, Noemi's father was being taken into captivity. And within a year, the center of Berlin was being bombed. Thousands were killed. And yet on this SS estate, not a single house was hit, not a single person even injured. If there is a God, then where was he? After I'd found out a little bit about my grandfather and who he really was, I was able to speak to my father, who by then was slipping into dementia. I asked him what his father was like. He said he was a very distant man. He was always going away on business trips and then coming back and getting ready to go on another business trip. The rest of the time, he would spend in the garden wearing his SS uniform. We move forward now. Germany is losing the war. My dad's older brother, like every boy in his class, sent to fight. And here he is in his uniform. By Christmas, he joined the tank regiment. This is the last photograph of him taken. He was killed just at the age of 19. And at the end of March 1945, as the Russians moved towards Berlin, my grandfather came into the house in the evening and announced that the office is being relocated to the Alps. And so they set off in early April, heading south, just as my wife and I did just about 70 years later. They stopped off at a place that my grandfather knew very well. They stopped for a few days at Dachau. Just before we set off on this journey, I told my dad, he was now in full dementia, and dementia loosened his tongue. He told me something that I know is hard to believe, but there was a single fact that he told me that was so improbable, but real, that I knew that what he said was true. He told me that the family had been given accommodation in a barracks hut that had been used by the SS. He remembered sitting in his bunk, his mother and father standing at the window. He said that the room looked out over a long, low building with a tall chimney. His mother said, "You know what they're doing in there?" His father said, "No." She said, "They're killing them. They're killing the Jews and burning their bodies." His father said, "No, they wouldn't do that." She said, "Of course they would. Can't you smell the flesh?" By then I knew just who my grandfather was. And I went to the archivists at Dachau and said, is it just possible that my grandfather could be visiting places that the factories were Auschwitz, Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald? Could he be visiting these places on a very, very regular basis and see skeletal figures, see beatings, see dead bodies, and not appreciate the scale of what was happening? And they said, that is impossible. My wife took this photograph, and I have no recollection of her taking it. Sorry, that was difficult. The family moved on to the Alps, just as we did. We took the exact same route. We went up that same valley in April when there was still snow on the ground, just as there was in 1945. And now it made sense, a story that my dad told me, of a jeep full of American soldiers coming up this track. They jumped out, they grabbed my dad's sister, stuck a gun in her back and said, "Take us to your Nazi." And that was when my grandfather was beaten up, taken away, and disappeared for 3 years. The rest of the family went down to the local town. The war had ended the day before, and an American soldier took this photograph. My dad wearing an American soldier's helmet. I never knew my grandparents. They died before I was born. By a supreme irony, they were buried opposite Hameln's Jewish cemetery. And as I was researching this story and then writing about it, there was one person who was my guiding light. His name is Bernhard. Bernhard's father committed atrocities in Berlin. Bernhard told me he could accept that, but what he couldn't accept was that his father said, "And I would do it again." And when Bernhard retired as a history teacher, he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to telling the local children of Hameln and the surrounding villages about the Jewish communities who had lived there. And he even managed to persuade their parents to restore the gravestones that had been smashed under Hitler. And so we have two families. We have the family that hid the past or tried to forget it. And then we have Noemi's family who want us all to remember. And now it's your chance to ask us anything, because we've spoken to all sorts of audiences now, to students, to schools, to synagogues, to public meetings, to government departments. We get people's reactions, and we also get lots and lots of questions, and questions are essential. 19 months ago, the last time we spoke to about 160 barristers in Manchester. They managed 2 questions between them. I'd like a lot more than that, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek and Naomi, for sharing this incredibly powerful yet very personal story. At multiple points, I've got tears in my eyes. I guess I'll take the privilege to ask a couple of questions before I open this to the floor. I'm sure many members here would have questions to ask. You said you two have been doing this for a while, speaking to different audiences. To each one of you, what are your favorite memories of doing this when the audience respond to your talk?
Shall I start? Okay, I'll start with Hackney, the 9th poorest school in England. The best audience ever. Because they understand hatred, prejudice, violence. This was a multi-ethnic group, impeccably behaved, tremendous. Take a lot to beat that.
And I think we came out together. I mean, it sticks in my memory as well. It was on a total high because they were so involved and they seemed to get what we said. But there was also a moment, even though they lived it, like Derek said, there was also a moment of enlightenment and empowerment, saying you can do something about it and do it in a civilized manner, in a nice way. So that was very special. But what Derek and I said before we came here is that we missed our human audiences, that each of you are very special. And what we love the most is for you guys to react to us, to have a conversation with you so that we grow together, as it were. And you're part of our bridge and we keep growing this bridge, make it as big as the one in San Francisco, maybe.
I love the topic of the talk, which is building bridges. It's about making this connection and reaching out to people. But at this day and age, we look at the politics today, which is polarizing. Do you think the arguments of building bridges are getting weaker compared to the arguments building the wall?
I'd like to ask you all that, really, because you are our future. What you think, I'd like to reflect back and have your opinion. I think we can do something about it, can't we? We don't just have to sit there and take it. And it's up to you guys. I'm a bit old for it to change. I can just come and speak to you, but I can't go up and do something in politics. I can do my bit by going around educating, by writing letters, whatever I'm good at, I can do to make it a better people. I think we can all do that. I also think we have to stop this trolling on social media and hide behind the screens, be more honest. And I think then the polarization would stop. It's easy and brave to be mean without showing a name or have these stupid, weird names. And what's the pleasure of just doing nasty? You know, when you receive one act of kindness, just a small act, it has such an effect, not only immediate, but long-lasting. And it looks like a weakness to speak about emotion. It's actually a strength.
And I would say that it's the hardest thing to approach somebody who is very different in all sorts of ways. But it's also the most joyful outcome to connect with somebody who is different. And I've learned so much about Judaism from Noemi. I knew nothing. And I just feel this great, maybe it's too crass to say empathy, but I feel Noemi's pain when politicians say something that's anti-Semitic. I don't feel it, of course I don't feel it, but I get a sense of it. And I get a sense of the joy of Shabbat when a whole family come together and don't have electronic devices separating them. I mean, what a clever idea. Good one from God there.
I think the fact the two of you are having this conversation together takes a lot of courage. The courage to speak out and the courage to face the truth in your own family and look back to history to face that. To what extent do you think the two of you, this combination, is exception more than the norm?
I don't know. I don't see many of us, like many with our shared past, doing it. But maybe more of you will do it, just with differences, and share the message. And I'd like to think that we can grow something. You know, you don't have to, just if you have differences, to share a platform and to join and grow from it. That's my sincerest hope. I don't know many who've done this combo, as it were. Yeah. What do you, Derek?
No, I think it's worth saying that for Noemi, approaching me was incredibly difficult. Noemi, to tell the audience about who I was at first in your head.
I did at the beginning of the talk, actually. I said, do you approach Derek? Do I see Derek as the Nazi? All I could think about was not Derek, but Derek's history, what Derek embodied, what was what happened to my family. On both my mother's side and my father's side, we lost large chunks of family. My father's was very immediate family. My mother was her aunts and cousins, etc. So it was painful, but yeah, I knew we had to make this rapprochement to make the world really understand that we can be. I asked for civility, but actually Derek and Sarah have become dear friends who, when I'm in trouble or something's really on my heart, I will ring them and confide, particularly when COVID broke out and I needed some major hand-holding because my world changed, like, I don't know if yours did, from 3D to 2D. And so it's a work in progress, because when we first met at the synagogue, and then the next meeting to set up the talk was at King's Cross Station. I was dressed appropriately. And we met, and Sarah kindly put a picture up of Derek's grandfather next to my father on the screen. And I went, probably like I am now, bright red, but I didn't know how to say that. I didn't really feel very comfortable. And yet I was the one that approached Derek to do this together. So I recognized that my emotion hadn't quite followed my intellect. I found it hard, and I didn't know if I did right by my dad putting them together. And Sarah was sensitive enough to notice that you feel uncomfortable. What is it? Because our relationship was so new. I didn't feel I wanted to be rude and ruin anything by my emotions, because I do often think with my heart rather than my head. So I need to check and keep it in balance. And so it has been a journey for ourselves as well, hasn't it, Derek?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. I want to open up to the floor for some questions. If you want to ask a question, please put your hand up, and a committee member will come to you with a microphone. The lady there, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your histories with us, because I know that's really difficult. I wanted to ask you, Derek, actually, to what extent do you think your father and grandfather knew about kind of just how bad what was happening was actually going on?
My grandfather knew absolutely everything. I mean, there's obviously the records in the accounts show that he knew everything. He even knew it down to an item where he registered 6 railway carriages of clothes. He went on trial. He said he didn't know anything. That material, the material that I put up, was being used at the Nuremberg trial to hang his boss. But they didn't have copies. So he was tried and he got the minimum sentence. What my father knew is he didn't want to know. When I interviewed him in 2010 about his childhood in Berlin, I'd only just found out then that he actually lived in Berlin. He told little lies about who his father was. But I think in a way he believed them because he didn't want to accept what his father had done. And after 60-something years, he could now believe those lies. And so he wasn't telling his son an untruth. not in his head. And that was a whole thing that Germany had to face up to. That as soon as the war was over, there was an expression, Schwamm darüber, meaning just wipe it away. Let's start again. And so it wasn't until probably round about the Eichmann trial in 1960 that Germany started, the younger Germans, the next generation started coming through and saying, we need to know what our fathers have done and we need to address this as a nation. And I don't think there's any country in the world that has come to terms with their past as much as Germany. Certainly Britain hasn't.
Another question. Yeah, the member there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm unsure about which one of you might be able to answer this question. And again, it is a little personal. So I'm from India, and India seems to be going through a wave of fundamentalism right now. And it's very difficult because it seems as though there is a second kind of a partition taking place inside homes. So, you have family members and relatives with whom you spend festivals and you're sitting at the dining table, and they have these really rather crazy fundamental views about communities and about things that are happening in India. And then you also have friends and loved ones who are members of those communities. And it becomes very difficult to maintain personal relations with these family members who you've known for your entire life. And at some point we decided that, we're not going to talk about politics. But you still know that there is a certain value system that is present inside the room. And it's almost like an elephant in the room that you don't know how to address. So it's become very difficult for me to at least, maintain any level of courtesy or respect for these family members. I'm wondering, based on your experience, how have you been able to navigate and negotiate that?
Wow, I'd say that's the hardest question I've ever been asked. I mean, to have divisions within your own family. I mean, my grandmother hated the Nazis, but she was happy to accept the privileges. So she kind of disagreed theoretically, but not to any great extent. It's very hard, isn't it? I wish I could give an answer. Noemi, any thoughts?
It breaks my heart because I'm a person that doesn't like confrontation, and I always like to build people together, not to break up families or break up couples. I will always try and, I'm no angel, I can have an argument or whatever, but I can't. But when things are so bad, it's it's difficult. You pretend and just go along, do the polite thing still so that you don't rupture, but you know that their values are twisted or are extreme. There is no easy answer. It's hard to say, for me, dissociate yourself from your family, because you'd also suffer, and things are not always black and white. Go on, Derek.
I say just keep to your own personal integrity.
Yes, that's true. Your own moral values. Yeah.
That's hard. That's very hard.
Thank you for bringing this out so honest and open. It's not always easy.
The member in the brown hoodie. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry. Hi, and thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, in Germany specifically, we can see a rise of anti-Semitism and also the rise of maybe the far-right AfD party. Now, considering that especially Germany and especially Bavaria have kind of a very saturated school curriculum as far as the Third Reich is concerned, as far as the Holocaust is concerned, should we be changing the way we educate people about the Holocaust and about the Third Reich?
I want to have your opinion of that as well, always, all these good questions. Here in this country, Holocaust is on the syllabus for year 9, which is 14 to 15-year-olds, but it just says the word Holocaust. It's not prescribed in any way. I know University College London, the Institute of Education, which is their Holocaust department, are trying to change that, but it takes time because teachers are frightened to teach it because it's a difficult, they perceive it as a difficult subject, yet there's a lot of aids about in institutions, Holocaust Educational Trust. I think for me it's time to teach it because, like Shanghai said, our politics are getting more polarized. All over the world, we are, more divisive, more derisive, and we should teach it and make it relevant today. I strongly believe that, so much so that for years now I've been trying to bring out an animation, and I say it's in color because it happened in color. It happened in broad daylight, in the light. And even though, of course, the archive pictures are showing the concentration camps and the Jews in the pajamas that they were forced to wear, it others us. So it's important to show us, which we are, which you can see me as being part of the human race. And so I think, yes, there's lots of room for improvement and to mix it in the curriculum and also with human stories. Not fact, not only, it broke out in 1931, the invasion of Germany into these countries, Germany into here, your Evian conference, Wannsee conference, all of that is important. But the Holocaust isn't taught properly if you don't bring in the emotion, because then you're repeating what the Nazis did and took that out of themselves in order to do that, and took that out of wanting to take that out of the Jewish people to achieve that.
And I'd just add, I think it's important to emphasize that the Holocaust, the factors of the Holocaust that are common to many genocides, and make it relevant to school children whose parents might have come from Croatia or Rwanda or Myanmar, so many countries that have had terrible things, and there are factors common in all of them. So I think the Holocaust as a historical item, but also as an example of what people can do to each other given certain conditions.
Questions? Remember there.
Thank you for your phenomenal talk. I'm originally from Germany. Several of my family died in the Holocaust. I had to flee. And keeping remembrance culture alive is not always an easy thing. You might be familiar with the Stolpersteine project that translates as stumbling stones. So the idea is golden cobblestones that are installed outside the last place of residence of Holocaust victims. And it's divisive even among survivors and their families, because some think it's a valuable part of remembrance culture, some think it sort of symbolizes Holocaust victims being trampled on. What are actual projects that you think should be implemented in Germany to keep that culture alive?
I would say the most important thing is to maintain the humanity of the people who are involved. And I think Anna Frank does that so well, because a child of her age can recognize the human being, the preteen, the teen, and recognize that what had this little girl done to deserve the death that befell her? And equally to look at the perpetrators, not just the Adolf Hitlers of this world, who are a 1 in 50 billion or 50 million aberrations, but the people like my grandfather. What were the elements that led to him doing what he did? Why did he make decisions all through his life? How could a man convert people to numbers and mass murder to statistics and live with it? So it's opening people's imaginations. My grandfather did everything he did because he closed his imagination and lived the life of a mediocrity. And that has to be an aspiration that we must give young people and say, do better.
Noemi, have you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, I think as survivors are getting fewer and older, it has to be a multi-directional approach in visiting the concentration campsites, the museums, but particularly schools and universities, where you can have free debate on this subject and really learn and understand and talk about it and talk with current examples so that you can, we all know bullying, we all know how it starts, make people feel and empathize. That's the most important. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah, the member there in the yellow puffer jacket.
Thank you so much for coming. So Hannah Arendt wrote The Banality of Evil, which is a quintessential Holocaust work of philosophy about how easy it is to just find everyday evil in society and how easy it is for it to come out. When something like Nazi Germany takes hold of a country, Nazi regime. And she had dated Heidegger, who was an existentialist philosopher who then became a Nazi. And I was just wondering, Derek, you mentioned that your father said that your grandfather was a distant man and that he didn't seem very connected potentially with reality. I was wondering what kind of mindset is it really for a person to be in to commit such atrocities? And how do you notice when someone could be slipping into a mindset where evil could become banal for them?
Changes in behaviour, certainly. There was an incredible programme on, I can't remember if it was on the BBC or Channel 4, but it was about young men who had gone to Syria, I think it was, and become jihadists. And before they went, their friends noticed just a complete change of behaviour. They wouldn't socialise with the people they'd been with before. They wouldn't go clubbing. Just the kind of this dismantling of their previous lives, changing the way they dress, and becoming withdrawn. And I think there was an element of that in my grandfather, that the man who had a good sense of humour before Hitler came to power became a very, very withdrawn, a very introspective man within the family. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you.
I'll take one last question from the floor. Are there any more questions? Yes, the member in the black jumper, yeah.
Thank you very much for everything you've said so far. I'm just wondering if you have any, I suppose, practical advice on how to approach people who feel indifferent or ambivalent to atrocities such as the Holocaust, and how you think we should go about instilling in them an appreciation of understanding about issues such as the Holocaust.
Shall I start?
Yeah, you can.
I'm going to take a really, really mundane example. We noticed a little boy who was smashing bottles in the park. We didn't say to him, don't do that because it's wrong. We said, if you do that, cats might walk on it and damage their feet. Do you know anyone who has a cat? So bring it to them at an emotional level that is meaningful to them. Find examples. Try and get into their mindset. We go back to the elderly Holocaust survivor whose instruction to all of us is to understand people with different ways of thinking and try and relate to them and see how they think.
I can't add to that. It's perfect. You'll be glad to know. Absolutely. It's each time the human.
That's great. Well, I just want to say thank you, Naomi and Derek, for sharing with us and doing this event. And also thanks our members for asking those incredible questions and sharing your personal experiences. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for here today. But I also know Naomi and Derek brought their own book for some of their own work they will share with you guys. So there will be an opportunity to purchase a copy of their book if you want to know more about them, if you want to chat to them. I think they'll be around for a bit. You can catch them at the end of the event. So please join me to thank Naomi and Derek once again.